Well, all right. Welcome to the Hour of Decision. My name is Lou Moore, and this is the 51st episode of the Hour of Decision. The first 50 can be found on News for America at newsforamerica.org or on my personal website, loumore.com. But now, with episode 51, we find ourselves joining forces with Liberty News Radio. And so this is now a radio show at noon on Saturday and Sunday. That's Mountain Time, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, etc., etc. Anyhow, it's great to be here with you. We're going to dive right into it. So politicians often are asked what they're reading or what books are their favorite books. Now, I don't think Kamala Harris has been asked that because really sure about her reading skills. But Bobby Kennedy was asked, now, what books have influenced you? What are books that have shaped your views? And he named off a couple of books. One of them, The Unspeakable, about JFK. It's a left-wing book that talks about JFK's alleged move to the left against the military-industrial complex. I won't get too far into that, but I do in 3 podcast episodes that I've done previously. But the third book that JFK Jr. mentioned, I mean, I was pretty shocked. But he mentioned this book right here, folks. If you're looking at the video, The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. And I was shocked for a couple of reasons. One, G. Edward Griffin, one of my heroes, a great writer, a great producer of videos over the years for the John Birch Society, for Western Goals Foundation, for Larry McDonald back in the day, and many, many more since he's kind of gone independent. He has an Austrian economics perspective. He understands the role of conspiracy in the world. He understands the machinations of the powers that be for one world government. And so he's a great man. Kind of surprised Bobby Kennedy would be reading something by him. But you could say, well, Kennedy's concerned about the Fed. Fed's maybe too much power concentrated in the Fed, needs some reform. Not really sure. Haven't heard him talk about this subject. But the other reason I was shocked by this selection is this, folks, is one of the most ambitious books ever written for conservatives, coming from the right, coming for patriots, coming for nationalists, coming for libertarians. This book doesn't just talk about the Fed, which is in itself an extremely ambitious topic. He talks about how World War I happened, how we got involved, how the Great Depression occurred, how bailouts were engineered, what the purposes of and machinations of all these bankers and other elitists are as far as getting us in a one-world government. I mean, folks, this book goes on and on. It's unbelievable, extremely well-researched. It took him years to write it, and then he keeps updating the book. I'm not really sure when the last update occurred, but G. Edward Griffin, this book is a monument, folks. I mean, I can't give it high enough praise, and I can't get over the awe of what was put into this book. And by the way, Willie Nelson, the musician Willie Nelson, I think he's still with us. When he comes out of the marijuana cloud, he said, "Boy, this book is scary. The story of the world banking system." Enough said. Even Willie Nelson, J. Edward Griffin got Willie Nelson's attention to this book. Ron Paul says, a superb analysis. Be prepared for one heck of a journey through time and mind. And boy, Dr. Paul's not kidding about that one. But anyway, so these politicians are always asked, what books are you reading? Or, what books influenced you the most, which was the question They asked Bobby Kennedy when he came up with this book. But so why did he do this? I mean, is it just true on the face of it? Is he really heavily influenced by this book, which is a free market masterpiece, a masterpiece of exposition of the world conspiracy? Is that the case? Was he just told that this is a way to get people on the right and he's never even opened this book? Is it a book he's heard about and his consultants told him this is the best way to go? I mean, I'm just not sure, and I don't want to impugn Robert Kennedy Jr. He's been very courageous, and he has his own book about this thick, which I also highly recommend, about that evil Dr. Fauci. And I'm going to be talking about that book in the near future as well. But I promised my listeners when I started this podcast that I would review books. And I've kind of been derelict in my duties in that regard, but I'm kind of going on a tear with that now, folks. So we're going to be talking about G. Edward Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it, of course, first of all, we have to talk about this meeting, this secret meeting that occurred on Jekyll Island with representatives from the Rockefellers, from the Morgans, the two poles, the two centers of influence, of huge influence after the turn of the century, the turn of the 20th century in the United States. So those people were well represented, but some impolite people have pointed out, and G. Edward Griffin goes into it in detail, among other topics, among other major topics in this book, how the House of Morgan was probably just a front for the wicked Rothschilds from Europe. And I don't know how much you know about the Rothschild family, the 5 sons, who each ended up controlling a central bank in Europe. And we're not talking about Liechtenstein and Monaco, folks. We're talking about England. We're talking about Italy. We're talking about France. We're talking about the major countries in Europe, basically controlled by one family. The central banks were by the House of Rothschild and all of their wicked ways. Anyway, he discusses that. But the Morgan representatives were there. The Rockefeller representatives were there. Paul Warburg was there, another very influential banker of Jewish extraction, connected with the Warburg folks in Germany. And, of course, the Bank of Germany was run by his brother. I mean, this is such an incestuous thing just from the get. And these people controlled the representatives at this secret meeting on this island at a duck club off the shore there in Georgia. These folks represented about a fourth or more of the wealth of the entire planet. And, of course, the reason they met in secret was they didn't want the public to know that all these rich folks were plotting to give America another central bank. We got rid of 3 central banks in our history. One before the United States was established. One was got rid of by the followers of Thomas Jefferson. And then, of course, the major battle that occurred a few years later over the second bank of the United States, led by Andy Jackson, putting his whole career on the line, taking on a huge political problem, a huge financial juggernaut, Nicholas Biddle, and what they called the Biddle Bank. I mean, he had bribed. Nicholas Biddle had bribed practically every member of the Senate. Daniel Webster, supposed to be a lion of the Senate, on the payroll of the second Bank of the United States, but Andy Jackson got rid of that bank. Americans made it pretty clear they did not want it to be replaced. But so they were plotting to do this, and then they later succeeded after they did more shenanigans. We'll talk maybe a little bit about that in this short segment. But that's why it's called The Creature from Jekyll Island, because the plot to have this bank, which is not really a bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, which is not federal, not a reserve and not a bank. It's supposed to be a system, the Federal Reserve System. That whole thing was hatched, plotted out by these individuals on Jekyll Island, and the man really behind it, the one that put the most horsepower intellectually behind this bank, not to mention financial horsepower, was Paul Warburg. His brother, I believe it was Max Warburg, controlled financing in Germany. And of course, this was a little nervous a few years later because we went to war with Germany. And old Paul's brother was on the other side of the fence there. I think they continued to get along, though, because these bankers, folks, and one of the bottom lines, one of the many, many bottom line analyses, conclusions that comes from this book is that the bankers are kind of above this whole nation-state thing. They don't consider themselves a part of a nation. They're not patriotic. They're not loyal to nations. They are loyal to their own fraternity, making a ton of money and acquiring a ton of power that they hope will lead one day to a one-world government, which they will control with a one-world central bank. And now, of course, as we move on even, this goes in time past, really, G. Edward Griffin's effort. He started writing this book. I have to look. I think it was about 2000. The first edition came out pretty early. And then I'm on, my book is the 5th edition. He has editions past that one. And he's made changes in all these. It goes back to 1994 was the first edition of this book. So he doesn't really get into digital currency, digital banking. And, of course, we know now, folks, our buddies over there at the World Economic Forum, and these folks over there, they want a digital currency. They want a worldwide digital currency that will be issued, in their minds, by a single central bank as part of the final end game of consolidating all of the nations, getting rid of the sovereignty of all of the nations, including ours, and creating a one-world bank inside of a one-world government. So, as I said, Griffin gives you a bottom line on a lot of things, like how America ended up in World War I. Ladies and gentlemen, World War I was a fight between colonial powers, colonial rivalries, and all of them had their hands dirty in what they were doing around the world. The British, for example, invented the concentration camp and began using it in Africa on the Boer settlers that they unceremoniously pushed out of power, forcing the consolidation of South Africa at that time into the British Empire. So Cecil Rhodes could get a lot of diamonds, make a lot of money, financed by the Rothschilds, and they thought, boy, this is a great system. You just round everybody up and put them behind barbed wire in a concentration camp. This is how the British Empire rolled, folks. They were nobody's heroes, and Germany, no different. Anyway, they were carving up different parts of what we now call the Third World in Africa, in Asia, in the Mideast. The Germans were primarily in Africa, but the British were all over the world. The sun never set. The British Empire at that time. So that's what World War I was about. Britain was starting to die as an empire. They had fell for the siren song of free trade. They were stripped of their industry by their free trade policy. Their country was slowly, but then pretty soon, not so slowly, moved towards socialism because of the Fabian Society and because of other socialists who were very enamored with a fellow that came to Britain in the second half of the 19th century by the name of Karl Marx, who influenced a lot of these folks. So Britain was already in trouble as an empire, and Germany is just coming on. Germany wasn't even a nation until the second half of the 19th century. Bismarck made Germany a nation. Anyway, I tend to get off on a lot of historical things. I love history. Our people don't know enough history, but I'll tell you what else they don't know enough about is economics. So let me move from history to economics here pretty quickly. But anyhow, so Griffin gets into detail about how the sinking of the Lusitania was arranged, how the individual who also arranged to get the Congress to fold and support the Federal Reserve Bank, Colonel House, now got America, got the members of Congress in America, got the president first, Wilson, and then the Congress to support a declaration of war, something we don't even have anymore before we go to war, and got us all tangled up in this European war, and then spent a hell of a lot of money, and that's because of the Federal Reserve Bank. So let me segue. That's just one historical event that he goes into in detail that isn't even, it's connected, of course, to the Federal Reserve, but it's kind of its own topic, and he goes into great detail with a lot of documentation about how that catastrophic event occurred. But anyway, these guys at Jekyll Island, they hatched this plan, which was just a refinement of things going on in Europe and even in America without a central bank, but with a national banking system, as they called it, which was essentially of how money could be created out of nothing, and that process would be controlled by them. But it's not true, ladies and gentlemen. You hear people say, oh, the Federal Reserve, that's a private bank. And there are stockholders in the bank, and they collect the interest on the money that's created. And no, that's so terrible. You know, a lot of that's not really true. The Federal Reserve is a partnership, I would describe it as, between the government. It's a quasi-governmental entity, but between the government and the international bankers. And it's not just a private bank. I mean, the head of the Federal Reserve has to be approved of in the Senate. He's picked by the president. They have to come before the Congress. They do a great job of not telling the Congress anything, and the Congress almost always does a terrible job of asking them questions because they don't understand what's really going on with the Federal Reserve System. And there's no way in this 23-minute segment I'm going to explain all of it, but trust me, folks, they set up a system where they can create money out of nothing. A lot of times they create money after they receive funds for bonds, but they can create money out of nothing. And then people in the banks affiliated with the Federal Reserve, your local bank, for example, can create, with 10% reserves, they can loan out money with only 10% of it being money they have. They get the rest from the Federal Reserve. It's called fractional reserve banking. So your bank doesn't take in $1,000 and then loan out $1,000. They take in $1,000 and then go to the Fed and loan $10,000. And they can even go back and call the debts that they are now monitoring because they've loaned out $10,000. They can take that debt back and call that an asset and borrow even more money and pyramid this thing into about 28 to 1. And Griffin explains this process in detail. He explains how we got into the Great Depression, how the Great Depression happened, and it's all money chicanery. And a lot of it had to do with trying to prop up England and Britain and the British Empire, because as I mentioned a minute ago, the British Empire was on the wane, but they were trying to prop up the Brits by manipulating our currency and printing too much money and allowing too much money in the system here to help the Brits. And one side detrimental aspect of that is that there was too much money in the system, and then they, in a maneuver not too long before the crash, they started sucking the money out of the system after they warned many, many people that were in the powers that be or other influential Americans, like Joseph Kennedy, for example, RFK Jr., by the way, warned him to get his money out of the stock market, which he did before they contracted the money supply by about 40% and crashed the stock market. So, anyway, it's a big topic. I highly recommend, if you are serious about being an activist and trying to take our country back, I highly recommend that you listen to this book. And if you're a real reader, you can read this book. It's a bit thick, but it's great to have the book to refer to, not to mention all the footnotes, not to mention the fact that J. Edward Griffin has a website. I think he's still operating this website, realityzone.com/footnotes, where you have a treasure trove of documentation on many, many topics important to patriots, not just the Fed itself or the act of monetary creation itself, but the whole machinations, the history of them, to bring us to a one-world government, to end our constitutional rights. Everything about how we got into the Depression, how we got into World War I, how we got into World War II, how all these bailouts have occurred, bailouts that keep getting larger and larger and larger, how we got in a situation where we're printing trillions of new dollars because of COVID. And in general, this book explains just about every major event that is affecting us today, that is affecting the fact that we are affecting our national sovereignty, affecting our constitutional rights, affecting how our children are being taught, affecting the public health scam, the government health scam that resulted in the COVID tyranny. I mean, there's so many tentacles, but the power center that's visible anyway, if you look closely enough, is central banking around the world, and particularly and most importantly, the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. And, I used to work for Dr. Ron Paul. I'm very proud of that fact. And what did he say? He said, end the Fed. He knew exactly what he was talking about. And that is exactly, folks, what we need to do is end the Fed. And I hope that RFK Jr. is sincere, that he is sincere in the fact that he's been influenced by this book. And I hope the ramifications of that continue in his life as he's gone from essentially an off-the-charts left-wing Dem to an America First patriot currently supporting Donald Trump. My name is Lou Moore, and you are listening to The Hour of Decision. Welcome to Hour of Decision. My name is Lou Moore, and I had talked about the book that influenced, allegedly, one of the three books that have most influenced RFK Jr., according to RFK Jr., and that was the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. Now I'm going to mention the book that, according to JD Vance, has been the most influential political book on his thinking, a book that he says he continues to refer to. He said this in an interview recently in Vanity Fair magazine. And that book, shockaroo, I was pretty shocked about Robert Kennedy Jr. saying that The Creature from Jekyll Island was one of the three most influential books for him. But JD Vance says the book most influential for him is the book Death of the West by Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan, one of my favorite people, and The Death of the West, one of my favorite books. So again, question is this one of the books that is most influential for JD Vance, for JD Vance's formation as a political person, for the background belief that kind of guides him in his public life? Or did he just say that to get a lot of nationalist conservatives to support him who are skeptical still, some of them, because of all the nasty things he said about Donald Trump just a few years ago when he was palling around in Hollywood and getting his highly acclaimed book, Hillbilly Elegy, made into a great big Hollywood movie. So there's skepticism about Vance. He's done a tremendous job on the campaign trail, in my opinion. He's unbelievable. These questions he takes right in the rallies, he just goes right back to the risers, as they call them, where the fake news is located in all these rallies, and has them ask him questions over the audience. Unbelievable. And does a fantastic job answering those questions. So Vance has done a good job for Trump, and I won't get off on that too far, but I do want to explore this book in light of the fact that JD Vance says this is one of the most influential books on his worldview, on his way of thinking, on his journey, I guess we could say, as a political figure, and now possibly our future Vice President of the United States of America. So Pat Buchanan, first of all, a great man, another forerunner. Many of you know, I guess I need to make sure all of you know in this audience, that I wrote a book called Forerunner. It's about my experiences as the national campaign manager for Dr. Ron Paul. It's also about the historical developments that have led us to where we are today, where we have one of the two major parties. At least we're trying to wrest that party away from our political masters, from the powers that be, from the corporate giants, from the central bankers, and give it back to the people as an America First party. One of a major forerunner to this event was Dr. Ron Paul. But another forerunner to this event before Dr. Paul influenced this process, in my opinion, was Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan was totally America First on issues like immigration, on issues like free trade, which is not free and is going to cost us dearly if we don't reverse course in that area, and also on the whole international issue, the foreign policy issues surrounding what we now call endless wars, which we got one going on right now in Ukraine. We're in danger of having another one go on that we might become involved with in the Mideast, and we're already involved in that, hugely involved, but I mean boots on the ground involved. And anyway, these are issues that Pat Buchanan was right on the beam with what we're hearing, and better in some ways, from Donald Trump, and this goes back into the 90s. So after Buchanan's political career pretty much unceremoniously ended with his failed Reform Party run in 2000 against George W. Bush, he really started cranking out these books, and he's written a number of them on both foreign and domestic issues. But the book that I think gets at the core, ladies and gentlemen, of our challenge in America today is his book, The Death of the West, because he talks about the cabal, evil thinkers and wrongdoers doing everything they can to eradicate Christianity. And honestly, an undercurrent in his book is they're doing everything they can to eradicate the descendants of those who created Western civilization, who brought Christianity to Europe, and then to the United States of America, who brought us individual liberty, the recognition of God's desire for us to have individual liberty, who brought us the rule of law, who brought us the Constitution of the United States, who brought us the idea, the concept of limited government. All of these things in peril, in danger, and Buchanan talks about these things in detail in his book, The Death of the West. He talks about the unsustainable level of immigration coming into this country, both legal. I mean, millions of people are coming into this country every year now, folks, legally. And I know big business loves to have cheap labor. They just love it. And it's cheap labor whether you're talking about on the farm, whether you're talking about, at the tech giants, or whether you're talking about construction sites, whether you're talking about hospitals. They love the cheap labor. And then, of course, we have this incredible push, deliberate push by the left to bring in as many people as possible illegally. And, of course, what is behind all of this, folks, is the desire for our masters to give us a one-world government. Because if there's a one-world government, who gives a rip if there's a border between the United States and Mexico? Who gives a rip if there's 20 million people, not just Mexicans these days for sure, but people from all over the world coming into our country, not to mention all of the side action, the pedophilia, the marketing of children, the marketing of other human beings as slaves, all the drugs coming in, and all of the people coming in who look to me like they're very put together, fit, well-built, young men who possibly could be trained to do no good in the United States in a military way. And this has been called out. I'm hardly the first to bring it up. But we have all these problems at the border. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris seem to be, and Alejandro Mayorkas seem to be doing every single thing they can to make sure it continues. Now, they've pinched the flow off a little bit before the election. We're trying to get Kamala over the top, remember. Excuse me. But anyhow, immigration, big problem. Pat Buchanan talks about the history of it, and he talks about the lack of will on the part of people in Europe and here to defend our civilization and to defend our territory. Europe is being swamped. It's being totally overwhelmed. The seat of Western civilization, the seat of Christian civilization, and all of this is being orchestrated by people who are up to no good on the left. The Frankfurt School types, the people that want to destroy our culture and give us drag queen story hour, all the DEI folks that want to make sure we have that equity out there, that the outcomes are predetermined by a central government, and outcomes that will make sure that the part of the population most likely to want to retain their freedom are being swamped by other people, other cultures, and being removed from more and more tracks of employment, more and more opportunities to even make a living in this country. There's DEI offices, folks, in just about every big corporation in America, and a whole lot of corporations that aren't that big. And we read now some of these outfits, they're getting rid of DEI. I'll believe it when I see it. But even if some of them now are, because of the huge pressure that's come from people like you, I believe, which is a great thing, what the hell is wrong with these corporate leaders? They're supposed to be capitalists. They're supposed to be Americans. They're not. They're not capitalists, and I don't think very many of them consider themselves to be Americans. And anyway, all this stuff is discussed in detail, the precursors, the historical background to it in Buchanan's book, Death of the West. So he talks about the immigration crisis he talks about the industry of moving people illegally and legally into this country. And of course, that's only half of the equation, because he's not just talking about moving a new population into this country, but persuading the population that's already here not to have any children. And of course, this is the death of Europe and the death of America. It's the death of the white race, ladies and gentlemen, if the trends that we see now continue. I mean, Europe is almost down to a replacement rate of like 1, which it needs to be 2.1. It was like 1.4, 1.3. It just keeps going down. There is no country in Europe where the native population is replacing itself. None. While the population is being swamped, the countries are being swamped by a new population of foreigners, and it's happening here too. Don't think that it isn't. And they're doing everything they can to foster a worship of the minorities, of what were the minorities in this country, to the detriment of the majority population. I mean, in 1960, ladies and gentlemen, America was almost 90% white. And there are good people of every background, and I'm not going to give the whole, some of my best friends are, and all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, it's obvious that that's true. It's also obvious that if you replace the current dominant population, the population whose culture gave us America, whose culture gave us Western civilization, if you replace them with a new population, you're going to have a new country. And if you replace the people who are individualistic and who believe in property rights and who believe in free enterprise and who believe in the United States of America, in our sovereign destiny, a manifest destiny for this country, which many, many Americans used to believe in. America is a city on the hill. If you replace these people, you are weakening or destroying that vision, that framework, that cultural foundation. And of course, all of this is exactly what our masters want, as they are moving us as fast as they can toward a one-world digital tyranny. So you put new people here, and then you persuade the natives not to have kids. And then you don't teach them how to work. And then you watch your country being destroyed, which is what we see right now. So the other part of this is very much spiritual, and I mentioned it a moment ago, but not just from the so-called left, but also from the right. We get the enshrinement of the economic man. You know, the most important issue is that we have a tax cut. The most important issue is that we get cheap stuff from China. Whoa, that is just so great that we get all these cheap things from overseas, when it's destroying the fabric of our culture. It's destroyed families. And then we have the extremely aggressive pushing of feminism, homosexuality, and now, of course, intersexuality and every kind of freakish conception known to man. And all of those things, of course, in destroying the family and destroying the ability of families to make enough money to live, lowers the birth rate. And then there's the cultural aspect of the heroes. You know, we saw it. I mean, it was really up front. It was really in our face when they started knocking down even statues of Abraham Lincoln, for God's sake, not very long ago. And you know, I'm going to be blunt here, folks. We push aside George Washington, one of the greatest human beings that ever lived, and the most central and most important figure to the creation of America, most central to us having the way of life and having the things we have today, and I don't just mean material things, but having this country, having the values we have, having everything that we have. He's pushed aside for a plagiarist, an adulterer. And ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King Jr. was a dirtbag. He was a dirtbag. He was unbelievable. He was trained by Marxists. He was surrounded by Marxists. He was pretty openly a socialist. His values were not American values. He knew very well that we were going to go into, once the Civil Rights Act was passed, we were going to go right into these set-asides, right into the favoritism, and right into a change from the opportunity, the equal opportunity, to the equal result, to equity. He understood very well where this was heading when he was pushing, oh no, I just want everybody to have a chance. Violence followed him everywhere he went, and he damn well knew it, and he damn well wanted it, because that's when the cameras came on, and that's when he got the attention that he needed to make him an effective agitator to change our culture and our civilization. So we get a holiday enshrining him. We get nothing but 24/7 about him and about what he supposedly believed, while our true national heroes, our foundational national heroes, are pushed aside. But then there's this whole thing about hate crimes. These are all things that Buchanan touches on in his book. It turns crime into a political narrative. A crime is a crime. If you do violence on somebody of any background, that's violence. It's a crime, a felony. This comes from Anglo-Saxon law. But now it turns it into a political narrative and opens up favoritism. Oh no, this is a hate crime. You're doing this against Jewish people. You're doing this against whoever. And so now it's all different, rather it just being the crime that, it was before. And the constant official narrative of lies. I mean, let's get blunt, folks. Blacks commit about 90% of violent crime in America. And almost all or 90% of interracial crime in America. Interracial violent assaults committed against other races, almost 90% are committed by blacks. They are 50 times, and this was back several years ago because this is not a new book, they were 50 times more likely to commit interracial crimes. But you can't have any statistics out there that are viewed as racist. And one of the great things is all of the black folk that are standing up now and speaking these truths to the white people who are brainwashed. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but it is also a great thing and a courageous thing for many of these conservative blacks to be doing. Buchanan talks about these Frankfurt School folks, people like Herbert Marcuse, who was a hero in the 1960s. He was from, I believe, San Diego State. And he was the one that really got this thing going on, oh boy, all these victims out there. Everybody's a victim except the white male. Everyone else is some kind of a victim, and we need to be doing something for them as a country. We need to do something for them as a government, but not for the white male. Absolutely not. So there are great migrations in history. They happen, but they don't have to happen. And there was a book years ago called Camp of the Saints. Came out in the 1970s. People thought, this book is, first of all, it's racist. It's so extreme and it's so fanciful. The idea that 40 or 50 million people would just get on boats from the third world and swamp Europe, and that the leadership in Europe would not have the courage to repel this obvious upfront invasion of their countries. Well, folks, there hasn't been one event like that, but this is exactly what's happened since the 1970s. It's more than 40 million people. So that gets into the issue of what is a nation, and this is where I see Buchanan's influence on JD Vance. A nation is not an idea. This was the neoconservatives that were trying to foist this one on us, folks. The neoconservatives were trying to convince us that, America's just a great idea and that anybody can come here and they can be part of this great idea of America. Folks, that's not a nation. A nation is an extended family, really. A nation has blood ties. It's not just about having an idea. Oh boy, America is great. What a great idea. It's not just that. It's the ties that we have of blood, of background, of heritage, of understanding, of the people who are our ancestors and what they did and what they believed. It ties us much closer together. It's why nationalism is so strong. It's why Marx had to go to nationalism. He couldn't, that was the only way for him to find victory. So anyway, JD Vance, reading Death of the West, and I recommend you read it too. It is a fantastic book by Patrick J. Buchanan. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is my first show on Liberty News Radio. Excited about being here. Hope you'll continue to tune in. We're going to be talking about a lot of topics in the next few weeks. We're going to be talking more about Ronald Reagan. We're going to be talking about the John Birch Society. We're going to be taking a look at this election, if not before, immediately after the formal election day. Now, the vote counting period might be taking a whole lot longer. Be taking a month. God only knows how long it's going to take, but we're going to keep an eye on that too. You can go to newsforamerica.org or my website, LewMoore, LEWMOORE.com, and pick up some of my earlier episodes where I talk about the slow-motion American coup d'etat, about how they dumped off old Joe, about how Obama had been doing some triple dealing, and we end up with Kamala, which was probably a screw-up on their part as the Democrat nominee. But how all those things went down, what their implications of those things are, and then, of course, the implications of a Trump presidency and the great need we have for one. Anyway, got historical material on Kennedy, on Joe McCarthy, one of my heroes, on my mind just went blank, on Joe McCarthy, on JFK, on Harry Truman, not one of my favorite presidents, on the that's one I was trying to think of, the Barry Goldwater campaign of 1964. Anyway, this historical stuff that you don't hear a lot of people talking about today that is really influential on your life today, and is really very important. So you can go there for that. You go to securevote.news and learn about the latest in election integrity news, and there's a lot of resources for you there too. My name is Lew Moore. This is Hour of Decision. Thank you very much. See you later.